I think for me, Alive Church has been a lot of things. It's been a source of community, a source of the Holy Spirit breaking down walls and barriers that I needed to give to Him. It's been a place where I have learned to grow and learned more about church as the Big C Church, but also as our own individual church.
I would say that when I first started going to Alive, I was trying to actually bridge the gap between me not really having that spiritual aspect. Alive really allowed me to have that walk, and it was not by myself. There was a team of people like Jonathan and Madeline and several others who really helped walk me through this journey from a spiritual standpoint.
To me, it's been a great place to serve the Fredericksburg community, as well as meet more people and learn to love others the way Jesus has loved us.
My family and I, we started Alive Church along with Jonathan, and then shortly a year afterwards, we moved to DC, and we're there for 3 years. But over that whole time, we missed Alive dearly, and we missed our friends dearly.
I came to Alive at first when I was 17, and I just kind of joined the youth group, and for the first time I really got to hear about the Lord and what He does and who He is. A few short months later, I got to get baptized. It was really, I think, the first time I've ever felt the Holy Spirit move in me and in a place. It was completely unplanned, and I think one of my favorite memories that I've ever gotten to experience at Alive.
I came to Alive, and it was just immediately engaging, and it was obvious that the people there really cared about each other, about the people who are coming in, but most importantly about what God could do through them. And it was a very Christ-focused church, and so I was excited to see what that could mean in my life.
Since moving back to Fredericksburg the past 2 years and being able to be fully welcomed back into Alive Church, fully welcomed by John and Steph and Dustin and Victoria and Caleb, it's been fantastic. The feeling of family immediately is what Alive is. It's what Alive has always been, a place that feels like home.
The biggest impact that Alive has had on my life is I went from being kind of a nominal Christian to actually having a true relationship with Christ. I called myself a Christian growing up. I went to church, I went with my family, I got baptized as a kid, and when we joined the launch team, I realized that I had been missing something for probably my entire life. And so just through the community that we have, through God speaking through Jonathan and through other people who have spoken at Alive, I feel like I've transitioned from just calling myself a Christian to actually walking with Christ, to actually investing in that relationship, to making progress in that relationship.
So when I think about Alive and I think about what God has done in our lives and in His life now, I think the biggest thing that I can think of that really has made such a huge impact is the community that we have, and it's really special to me over the last 4 years that we've been involved, and 5 years that Alive has been around, is that it's really evolved as we have evolved, not only individually but as a couple, through our dating, through our engagement, through our marriage, and now as we are welcoming our first son into the world.
And it's also been a place where I found my own family, where I met my husband, and now we have our first child. And so Alive's been really special to me for a lot of reasons, but those reasons are what I will remember for the rest of my life.
I've said hello to my beautiful son and my fantastic daughter, and seeing my eldest daughter grow in ways I never could have imagined.
I gotta say, what Alive has done for me most has been honestly showing me that following Christ, that being a Christian is more so than just being polite, than just being nice, than just being convenient.
Alive has really very quickly been very impactful on my life and my walk with the Lord, and just restored and redeemed a lot of broken things. And so I'm very thankful that the Lord brought me here
last 5 years have been up and down, but for the last 2 or 3 years, Alive has been there to help me every step of the way. Alive's really taught me to live fully alive in Christ. I mean, the name right here, we are alive.
Without Alive, my relationship with Christ would honestly not be as amazing as it is today. Truly.
A few years ago, I kind of fell away from the Lord and the church, and it kind of got put on the back burner, and the Lord did some really cool things in that time when I didn't even really notice it. I had, for the first time ever, a body of people who really cared about me and wanted to take care of me even when I wanted nothing to do with the Lord.
Even coming to Alive was kind of a battle with the Lord for me. I was in a really weird, kind of broken place. My grandfather passed away on Saturday, and I walked into church kind of reluctantly on Sunday. And someone asked, like, hey, how was your break? You know, because that's a typical question. And I just burst into tears. And from that moment, like, I didn't need to ask for help because people just leaned in and stepped up in ways that I don't think that they knew how much the Lord was working through them. And then my home church, shout out, sent me flowers, not knowing that, like, that is just a way that the Lord has continuously shown me in tangible ways his faithfulness in my life.
I have a place to serve. I think that that's been one of the things that for me is, as a musician and somebody who wants to find a way to use my talents for God and a way to learn and grow and find an enjoyable way to not just be a viewer but to be a part of things.
Alive Church made it very easy. It was really easy to get involved, to foster a sense of community, which was really important for us as newcomers into town. Jonathan and Madeline both have been just really great friends, even right off the bat. Not knowing us very well, they invited us into their home style church, and we've really been able to get plugged into our community here.
It's been interesting. I started by getting involved with the staging team and just helping set up. It was interesting just getting to see the behind the scenes. Been really special for me to kind of see ways where maybe I can be the person reaching out and just find ways that I can take what I'm getting from Alive and kind of give it back to the community around me.
God has your back, including mine, and it gets emotional because you just don't know exactly the wording to get there. You just have to experience it.
I don't know where I'd be without Alive, and that's kind of cliche to say, but it's true. I've developed a community that I can rely on, a community that, will support me and my goals and ambitions, and, that will lift us up.
At Alive, we have kids helping out in very unique, fun ways that they are part of the team, and they help out at, whether it's Kids Alive and seeing kids who were once in Kids Alive now helping with Kids Alive. And so I'm excited to see Shiloh get to grow up in that environment.
I was there pretty much from the beginning, actually. And really, honestly, as I've been reflecting on these 5 years, one of the things that has been amazing to me has been just what the difference is from where we are at now as a church to where we were then, when I was thinking, wouldn't it be cool to start this new church? And God was giving me that vision to plant a new life-giving church in Fredericksburg. I had a picture of what it was going to look like. I kind of figured, I know what God's going to do. And one of the things that's been beautiful about this journey of more than 5 years as a church, getting this thing started, has been God basically taking my dream, as I've seen him do in a lot of your lives as well, and he's taken it and he's just shifted it in ways, and in many ways I've seen, made it even better. Made it beautiful in a lot of ways that I wouldn't have expected. I've personally grown a lot. I got to find my wife while being here at Alive. I got to get married and then figure out what that looks like, and also journey through a lot of friends getting married, starting families, navigating the awesome changes in their life as they go from being just high schoolers into college students pursuing the dreams that God has for them, parents who are growing up and figuring out what it's like to parent older kids. In just a short time of 5 years, I've watched a lot of people's lives change. The things that I thought God was going to do or had to do Some of them he didn't do, and it was better. And so as I look at us at this mark as a church, and many of you have joined at different times in this journey, but you're a part of the family now. You're just as much a part of the family now if you just joined the church as if you've been with us for a while. I want to challenge us to not only just look back and celebrate, but to take this moment to look ahead. And I just want to tell you that God may very well do things for you and for me that are outside of what we would dream of. But his dreams are best, and our faithful obedience to him will lead us into whatever the good things he has for us in the next 5 years are. So as much as I'm gonna dream and kind of start planning, and we're gonna work together on putting things into action, we're at the same point. We're sitting and we don't even realize the moment we're in, because when we look ahead, all we know is that God's leading us, he's good, he's worth following, and as long as we faithfully obey him as a church, the best is yet to come.
I look forward to seeing everything else we accomplish together as a family and all the other lives we change and bring to the Lord. And I'm happy to say happy birthday Alive for 5 more years.
Honestly, thanks, Jonathan, for, coming down south, coming to Fredericksburg of all places, and reaching out to a ragtag group of people. And God has used you to really impact people, whether they've stayed or whether they've gone. They've taken something important and they're doing something for his kingdom. So, sir, honestly, thank you for your work in this.
So thank you, Alive, for 5 years.
Thank you, Alive, yeah. Here's to the next 5 years.
I'm so thankful and excited to see how he'll continue to work.
It's been a really cool 5 years, and I'm super excited to see what comes next, because the best is yet to come.
Happy birthday!
I'm convinced that as good as things have been for the last 5 years, our best days, our best years are yet to come. Well, hey there, friends, and welcome to an incredibly special Sunday here at Alive Church, as today, on Valentine's Day 2021, we get to celebrate 5 years of Alive Church. We launched on February 14th, 2016, so today, as we celebrate 5 years, thanks so much for joining us, and let's jump in and talk. So I'm not sure how you specifically got connected to Alive that has you watching this video today. But as we're here today celebrating 5 years and our 5-year birthday, I just want you to know I am so grateful for you. And I genuinely mean that. I am so grateful for every single person connected to Alive, who calls this place home, who's connected to the ministry of what God's doing here in our church. And I'm grateful for your story and how it's connected into the story of Alive. For some of us, maybe watching this, some of you, maybe you were there from day one. You were there on launch Sunday, and maybe you were even there for the launch team meetings before that, and you remember the days of being at the Dorothy Hart Center and all that downtown. Or maybe it was after launch day. You joined us at some sort of moment after that when we were at the Catalyst Media Center, and you were there when we were trying to constantly fight with Enterprise Rent-A-Car to let us have enough parking spaces for everybody, because they're a rent-a-car space. Some of us, you joined us during our time at Hugh Mercer. Then for 2 years we were there at Hugh Mercer Elementary School. And if you joined us during that period of time as a church, the question is, did you join us before or after we fixed the bathroom stalls? See if you know what I'm talking about. We had a bit of a height issue with our bathroom stalls that we came into that space with. And some of you, maybe you didn't connect actually in either of those two locations. Some of you began your connection with Alive over the last year, or maybe the last weeks and months and all kind of stuff, in this year where things have been very different. And I just want to say, very special. So if you joined us in the last year, you joined us in such a special time as a church. But when I look at the people of Alive and I look at the names and the faces and all that, I see stories. And I also see the faithfulness of God at work. It's just amazing for me to see God at work. I've been doing a lot of reflecting lately. I've been thinking a lot about what's happened over these last 5 years and all. And I just want to take a moment today together. And I want to share from my heart today about just some things that God's been teaching me. Basically, I want to share with you 5 lessons that I've learned over the 5 years of pastoring and planting Alive Church. Now, lessons, like I said, that I've learned from planting and pastoring Alive Church, but I'm convinced that these are 5 lessons that are just as valuable for you and your walk with the Lord as well. And so, as we journey into this together, I want you to really, hopefully, get something today that'll encourage you, but also challenge you as you look at the future of your life and where God's leading you and what God wants to do. So if you're a note taker, get ready, because here we go. Point number 1. God's faithfulness often looks funny. God's faithfulness often looks funny. Because see, God's faithfulness, just so we have a working definition, since this is going to be what we're talking about today, is the faithfulness, the point and the meaning of faithfulness. God's faithfulness is his reliability to do what he said he'll do. So it's his reliability to do what he said he'll do. But just thinking back of like Old Testament times and all that, Abraham and Sarah, these were these old people who were childless and had passed the point of when the having a baby together was ever going to happen. You know, just the day had come and gone, and they realized that they were never going to have a child. Well, God one time, he then promises them to start a whole new nation through them, a whole new nation through their offspring, which is weird. Like, right? That's pretty weird. It's so weird, in fact, that they think that they need to go ahead and help God out. They need to go ahead and bring in Hagar, Sarah's maidservant, and get her to help make it possible. Because it was just so funny and so weird that God would think to do this. And I'll just tell you, I've seen time and time again at Alive, God work in just mysterious ways that just make no sense to us. You know, so I can totally understand why Abraham and Sarah would have this temptation to make it make sense. Because God just works in ways that just are not comprehensible sometimes. You know, I know the song, the great hymn goes, "Great is thy faithfulness." But I think it's also fair to say, strange is thy faithfulness a lot of the time. Like, the way that God works in our lives is just beyond. In fact, I think this verse fits. Isaiah 55:8. It just says, for God saying, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways, declares the Lord." He's declaring it. It's true. My thoughts, what makes sense to me, and my ways and how I would do things is often what I've found in this last 5 years, not the way that God would do it. And you're going to find the same thing to be true in your life as well. There's going to be things and times where you're going, I know what makes sense. And it's just not necessarily going to be what God has making sense for him. You know, I wouldn't have thought that things would work out sometimes the way they have it Alive. Like, I wouldn't have thought that the doors closing to the school last year would actually somehow be a blessing to us. You know? But I can see many of those blessings now. And I wouldn't have thought that God would use a pandemic to actually grow our church. And yet at the same time, he has. I wouldn't have thought that God would have done a lot that he's done over these years. But it's been good. And he's been faithful, even if it looked funny. So I just want to ask you, what in your life right now looks funny? Like, what is just not making sense? What is God maybe telling you to do? Or is he maybe, you think he's working and doing something in your life that just doesn't make sense at all to you? Are you okay with the fact that even though it looks funny now, that it may absolutely be the faithfulness of God at work, doing what he said he'll do? Do you trust him enough to follow him even when it looks funny? So that's the first thing I've learned. The second thing I've learned about God's faithfulness is that God's faithfulness hardly ever comes without a fight. It doesn't just come easy. Now, I got to tell you, man, this is easily one of the 5 points today, one of the 5 lessons I've learned that I most wish wasn't true, that I would just love to have not be true. Because you got to know about me, I love a good challenge. Like, I love a good challenge and a good obstacle to kind of overcome and all that. But I also love, and I'm sure you can get this, when things just go my way. When I just smooth sailing, when things just kind of naturally fall into place and go my way. And I'll tell you this, over the 5 years of Alive Church that we're celebrating today, we've had our fair share of challenges. We've had our fair share of fights. And it's tough because in these moments when you and I are experiencing these fights and these challenges and we're wrestling with what is going on here, we're often tempted to develop a theology that says, if it's of God, like if this is of God, then it should be pretty easy. So if you're trying to figure out which way to go in your life, which way's if it's of God, it'll go pretty easy. And that's the proof that it is of God. It's just kind of falling into place. And it's tough in a sense to think about this and wrestle with this because God does order our steps. Like the Bible tells us that God orders our steps. So in a way, it can be that we're often blissfully being led along by God. But let's not forget that God often orders our steps in ways like this, where David does conquer Goliath, but it's through the scary showdown with some small stones that he had to pick up and go face to face with him. You know, Esther does rescue her people from the possibility of a very real Holocaust where they're all extinguished and exterminated by this leader. But in order to do that, she has to go through the fight of going head to head with the vice president of the great nation that she's, working in. Jacob, back in the Old Testament again. He does get to go back and be reconciled with his family and with his brother and all that. But it's not until he goes through the fight in the middle of the night with an angel of the Lord that's like a personification of God himself. Like he has to wrestle with this kind of thing in order to get to that point. And Jesus himself, he got to see the bondage of sin and death broken for humanity so that there could be a right relationship between you and me and the Father, that we could have a relationship to the Father that is unhindered, that doesn't need sacrifices. He got to see that. But it wasn't until he came through the fight of going to the cross. See, God's faithfulness hardly ever comes without a fight. 2 Timothy, Paul writes and says to his protege, he says, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. See, planning Alive is easily one of, if not the hardest thing that I've ever done in my life, to be quite honest. Now, please know that it's been more rewarding than much else that I've experienced in my life at the same time. But I gotta say that so that you know I'm not being negative when I say that there has been more painful experiences, more painful fights, and more painful challenges that I've had to go through in this last 5 years than ever in my life. I've shed more tears than I want to admit. I've taken a lot of long walks to just clear my brain and pray and ask God what on earth is going on. And I've felt crushed at times. We've had to fight to get a lot of things to work out at times, and yet at the same time I look and I go, God has been so faithful through it all. Like he really has been faithful to bring us through all of it. So I want to just make this personal for you. Are you going through a fight right now? Like, are you feeling like you're in the middle of a battle that's waging around you? There's challenge and obstacle. And is it because of that? Is the fight making it hard for you to trust in the faithfulness of God? I want you to think about it and realize that the best stories that you and I would ever go ahead and watch on a screen or read in a book, the stories that we feel like are so engaging and really good stories, well worth watching, don't they all involve some of the greatest challenges, some of the greatest fights and hard times that they have to overcome? So maybe, just maybe, God is being faithful in the midst of what you're going through. And in fact, what he's doing is just writing one of the best stories ever in your life. One that ends, as we just saw with what Paul said, with a crown of righteousness that God himself is going to award you someday in heaven. Isn't that worth it? So let's fight on. Let's keep going. Number 3, God's faithfulness is meant to build our faith. So I want you to imagine for a second here. Let me get us to see what I'm saying here. Imagine for a moment that you're about to hire somebody. So I'm not sure what your job is or where you're at in life, because there's a lot of people watching this, obviously. But you're hiring somebody for your business or for your school that you work with as an assistant maybe, or if you are yourself a student, you are hiring somebody to go ahead and be in the group project that is going to maybe determine your final grade for that class. So you've got 2 options of 2 people that you can hire, and one comes in and they hand you a resume filled with experience. And they got references upon references upon references of where they've succeeded before. There's proof that they've done this before, what we're about to go ahead and do, and they've done it a lot. And then, so with that in mind, you kind of look over that and you stretch out your hand to have the second person, who's also the only other option in this moment, the second person hands you their resume. So you stretch out your hand for them to put it in your hand, their resume, and instead they slap you some skin and they say, man, I've always wanted to try something new like this. So Does that affect how they both, does that affect in any way your trust levels with either of those two candidates? Of course it does. Like, obviously it does. Because the track records of people, the track records that they have, not only give us some sense of who they've been and what they've done, but also who they'll continue to be and what they'll continue to do. That's why it's so helpful when we look intently at the track record of the one and only God. The Bible is full of stories of God being there, of Him being faithful, of God being loving, of God doing good even in the midst of really bad situations, of God sustaining His people, of God providing for His people. Like, He's done it all before, and He's done it a lot, quite frankly. And so, in fact, when we look at Jesus, thinking of Him as a really good, worst case scenario, because when Jesus is the most innocent sufferer in the whole world, and He is dying on the cross for our sins, He references, in one of the few things He says on the cross, He references a psalm, a song from back in David's day that speaks to the trust that we can have in God's track record. And you're going to find the first line to be very familiar, because in Psalm 22, David writes, and then Jesus quoted him saying, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And then later on he says, "In you our fathers trusted. They trusted, and you delivered them. To you they cried, and were rescued. In you they trusted, and were not put to shame." And then at the end he says, you know what? "The afflicted shall eat and be satisfied. Those who seek Him shall praise the Lord. May your hearts live forever." What he's basically doing is he's looking back and he's going, the faithfulness of God has been there. And you know what? That gives me faith for today. That grows my faith for today. I want to ask you today, as you're just thinking about all this, what would you do if you believed that God was truly for you? I mean, not for you in the sense that His plans for you line up exactly with your plans for you, and if you believe really hard enough, He'll grant you not just 3 wishes, but every wish you could ever have. No, I don't mean that kind of for you. What if you believed that God was for you in the way that He's got the best plans and will bring them about for your best good and His greatest glory? What would you do if you believed that? Now, the fourth one is a little bit different, though. See, the fourth thing that I've learned in planting and pastoring a live church over these 5 years is that our faithfulness is worth more than our flashiness. Being flashy and all that. Flashiness is the stuff that grabs our attention. And I think we think in some ways that our flashiness will impress God and impress others. I know I've known people that feel like they can impress me with flashiness. I've had people over the 5 years promise me the world. I'm going to come and I'm going to move, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to give you all this time. And when they came to Alive, they promised so many things. And honestly, it became funny because before long, I began to realize a connection between big promises, really big promises, and short follow-through. So I started realizing the more that people wanted to be flashy, the less likely they were to be faithful. And I get that. I get the desire to want to be flashy, to want to impress, to want to seem like you're going to do all these things because, we can do that with God, can't we? I know I've been tempted to do that with God. We can start to be tempted to think, man, I've got to do something. I got to do something big for God. I got to do something that's going to just show off and be useful to Him. Or we can think, I've done something big for God. I've done some big things for Him. So I think I'm pretty good. I've done some big things. But the reality is that God's not as impressed by our flashiness as He is by our faithfulness. And that's a tough pill to swallow when you realize that faithfulness develops in rather boring ways. Again, I hate to tell you that because I know it's not going to be exciting for you to hear, but our faithfulness develops in really boring ways. It's formed in small moments in your living room, in small moments in your Zoom meetings that you're having, in those small moments of your text conversations, or in those small moments in your neighborhood and how you're dealing with your apartment neighbors or your neighbors in the house or the townhouse next to you. Sure, let's be honest, great faith is shown in really spectacular moments. It can definitely be shown really strong faith in spectacular moments. Yeah. But it's also true that our faithfulness is often developed in really, really simple ones, in the small moments that don't get to be noticed by many, if anybody, at all. When you're offered the easy out that compromises your integrity. When you're deciding how you're going to spend or invest your money. When you're talking to your boss. When you're talking to your spouse or your employee or your sister. When you're planning out what matters most this year. When you're looking for your future spouse or dealing with frustrations with the one that you already have. Will you be faithful to God? Will you still be faithful to Him even then? Will you be faithful to the words of instruction that He's given you to listen to? Are you going to still do that? See, faithfulness is often developed privately, but displayed publicly. So let's realize that it's often not going to be these always obvious big things that are making some of the biggest differences in your walk with the Lord. A verse to kind of ground us in this one that I just shared with our team last week at Forward Shift Training is Galatians 6:9. It's a familiar one. It says, "Let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap." We will, if we don't give up. So we're invited to a calling where weariness, is a real temptation, apparently. And where the temptation is going to be, come on, just give up. You've done enough. You've done too much. In fact, just give in and let's just call it a day. But we're also invited into a calling where apparently from this verse, God's inviting us into a harvest that we can get to experience in real, tangible ways in His time. I kind of picture it like this. It's kind of like that old movie Karate Kid with Mr. Miyagi teaching Daniel, training him to be this karate kid. And so he's having him wax on and wax off, and he's having him paint the fence. And if you ever watched the movie, you know exactly what he's doing. He's saying, you know what? Build these small moments so that when the big moment comes, you're ready for it. So I'm going to encourage you, what does it look like for you to build it into the small moments so when the big moment comes, you're ready? Because we just never know. I've seen this in 5 years. We never know when our small faithfulness is going to be rewarded with some big moments. And actually, that kind of leads us to our fifth and final thing. Our smaller faithfulness leads to bigger opportunities. See, in Matthew 25, Jesus is sitting around, he's talking to his disciples and some people, and he's telling a story. He often told, really important truths through the vehicle story. And in this story, he basically paints a picture of like an owner of an estate who's about to leave for a trip. And he gets for 3 of his managers to come and be in front of him. And he goes, all right, you're going to be responsible with 5 talents. You're going to be responsible with 2 talents. And you're going to be responsible for 1 talent. So each of these different managers that he trusts, he gives different amounts of things to. And the one who got 5 went ahead and worked and invested and was able to go ahead and get 5 more. So he doubles what he was given. The same thing with the one who got 2 talents. That person goes, invests it, and when the manager or the owner of the estate eventually does come back, he's doubled what he's brought in. But then the final one, if you know the story, he goes ahead and he gets afraid. He's thinking, this manager, this owner rather, is just really he's strict. He really expects a lot. So I'm just going to bury it and not lose it. That's what I'm going to do. And out of fear, he buries it and he gets punished when the owner comes back. And we all know that every good story, like this one, every good story has that moral of the story. Like for Jurassic World, it's that, the 4th Jurassic Park movie in the series. The moral of the story is maybe we just let dinosaurs be extinct. Like maybe just let that. And then there's Frozen, where the moral of the story is maybe we're better off if we just let it go. And then we also learn the moral in that same movie that there is truly no limit to how many times a kid will ask for and enjoy and want to continue watching a single movie. But then there's the movie Finding Dory, where the moral of the story is, I can't remember actually the moral of that one. The moral of the story for Jesus in this moment, in Matthew 25, is he summarizes it in one line that the master says to the servant who stewarded well. One of those servants that stewards well, he looks at them, the one who'd been faithful, and he says this important line. He says, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little, so I'm going to set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. See, the story is a picture of what God longs to do on the day when your life ends on this earth. and you are no longer here, but you're in eternity with him. God says, I want to look at you and I want to say, you were faithful with the bachelor's degree that you had. You were faithful with the 3 kids that I gave you, with the no kids that I gave you, with the 12 kids that I allowed you to foster and temporarily have. You were faithful with the home, with the no home, with the apartment, whatever it might be. You were faithful with the ministry opportunities that I gave you. And you were faithful with the ministry opportunities that I chose not to give you. You were faithful with what I gave you in totality. Now, I'm going to give you even more. So the cool thing is that this is what Jesus is saying that we have as a hope for heaven. But it also is so throughout the Bible that it shows us that this plays out here and now too. You know, even simple faithfulness leads to bigger opportunities. We've seen this over the 5 years at Alive as we've tried to be faithful with small things, and God just continues to give us great opportunities. And we're going to continue to hopefully be faithful with whatever they are. So I'm going to ask you here as we end, what's it look like for you to really value faithfulness in your life? Today, as we celebrate 5 years of God's faithfulness to get us to this point as a church, for you personally, what does it look like for you to see God's faithfulness and your faithfulness as really, really valuable? As something that's not just a good idea, but something that's really valuable, but something that's not really flashy. Because see, we are people who live by the faithfulness of God. We're here surviving because of that. We've also gotten to where we're going and where we're going to head in the future as well because of the faithfulness of God. So we follow his lead when it comes to where we've been and where we're going when it comes to his faithfulness. We follow his lead. As he says in Hebrews so well, let us run with endurance the race that God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. So, as we end today, thank you so much again for being a part of this journey that is called Alive Church. It's been a true honor to be the pastor, to be able to be a part of watching what God is doing in Fredericksburg and all over this region because of people being willing to listen to the voice of God and being faithful, and because ultimately of the faithfulness of God. I want to see you have dreams that you have that are of God and are from him flourish. But that doesn't happen without us really being connected to him and following him. So if you're listening and you're here, but you've never actually committed to following Jesus with your life. You've been around church, or you've been around this idea of church, or whatever it might be, whatever your story is, but you've never confessed that you're a sinner to Jesus and invited him to be the one who rules and reigns over your life. Then don't apply any of this stuff without first making that decision. Like, that is the most important. That's the first thing we need to do, is go ahead and say, Jesus, I'm yours. So I want to invite you to pray right where you're at today in your own words and just say, Jesus, I confess that I'm a sinner, that I need your grace, and I want to faithfully follow you because you've been faithful to me. The Holy Spirit works and stirs in our hearts, and he leads us to that point. So if that's what God's doing in your life, listen to him and lean in and do it. And then if you're following Jesus already and you've committed your life to him, dream bigger. I'm just going to challenge you to keep on pursuing the things that God has for you. Keep being faithful. Recognize that the small things are getting you to the bigger things. And let's just see what the next 5 years has for us as a church. Because if more and more of us will faithfully follow Jesus, I can confidently say that the best is truly yet to come.